Were you thinking of other things like, how do I do like a paid ad strategy? Were you evaluating other things, or did your mind immediately go to this podcasting?
It immediately went to podcasting because I'd actually done podcasting back in 2014. I had done my own shows. I had done all the editing. I had been doing interview podcasting, and I'd even done things with a local podcast here in town called Deemable Tech, which I don't think is running anymore. And I had gone down to the radio station where they recorded it, and so I had done other things in that realm. But what I realized when I was thinking, how do I replace networking? I knew I had to replace the one-to-one networking, connections and the one-to-many at the same time. Because when you go to an event, you do talk to an individual person, but you also get to stand up in front of everyone and give your little 30 seconds, right? So I'm seeing networking as this kind of 2-for-1 deal. And what else can I do that's not going to take up the same amount of time, I guess, an hour to go to a networking event or whatnot, that will give me the same 2-for-1 deal. And podcasting really just filled that slot. And so I really didn't have to go any further. I didn't have to look for anything else. That was the only thing I needed at that time.
I feel very at home with you as a relationship strategist, right? Like I don't know many people that think like that, right? This is at the core of everything we do, right? Like this idea that having this live show allows me to build a one-to-one relationship, and then making it a podcast is one-to-many, but we also add this like live component. So I can also build the one-to-few relationships. Like that is exactly how we think here. So I don't think I've ever heard anybody think like that as well. And it makes me feel very, very comfortable in your presence, and like we're kindred spirits. So I mean, let's get into how you pulled it off, right? Like I'm a podcaster. I get reached out to by all sorts of like podcasting agency broskies trying to get their people on the show, or somebody that's out there trying to do their own press tour. Did you start one way and it evolved, or did you like kind of like plan this like campaign effort?
It was very organic. And I will kind of say, just going back really quick to the relationship building side of it, I use a tenet of minimalism. And it seems like you're doing that as well, because a tenet is one in, one out, right? And so in this case, I had one out, which was networking. It was gone. And so when I brought one in, it had to exactly replace what I was already doing. The way that I actually went about it was I just started looking up being a guest on podcast. How do I be a guest? How do I pitch? And I literally wrote one pitch. That was it. I had one pitch, and the different shows that I would apply to were all marketing shows, except occasionally, because I got tired of talking about marketing, but I have done some things in my personal life. Like I went through a divorce. I was a ballroom dancer, with like competitive ballroom dancer. I love old movies, and I also love like historical genealogy type things. And so I would apply to podcasts that would just talk about those things as well. So I would have my one marketing pitch that was the same for every single show. And then I would have these little snippets that I would add to my pitch that would talk to my experience going through divorce and starting my business, or my experience as an old soul watching old movies when I grew up, or my experience as a ballroom dancer. And so those things actually got me onto more shows, because I wasn't just thinking inside my box of marketing. I was thinking outside my box. And one of the shows I got on was actually a marketer who did a show where we watched an old movie and we talked about it while we were watching it. Of course, the audio was not in the podcast, but we're literally watching it online together while he's recording us talking. And we talked about everything from business to family to what was going on in the movie. Another one I was on was about ballroom dancing and about ballroom dancing companies in small towns. And then she started asking me not only about my experience as a ballroom dancer, but also my experience as, a marketer, and how could these small ballroom companies during a pandemic get their word out. And I gave some ideas for that. So it was very much not hiding my identity as a marketer with these other kind of genres, but also where could I slip it in the conversation and kind of make it about marketing at the same time.
Love it. Love it. Love the approach of, you can always start with a wide net and then funnel it into kind of the conversation that you want to have. So you had your one pitch for marketing. How was the response initially with the one pitch?
Overwhelming.
Really?
It was overwhelming. And the reason it was overwhelming was because it was also something they could read as the intro. It told you everything you needed to know in 3 sentences. And it had a little parentheses in it. And I think this is one of the things that I saw the most come back as feedback from the pitch itself. When I would actually talk to someone, whether it was the introduction of the show where we would just like talk for a few minutes before we started recording, or whether it was a pre-interview before they would actually interview me, the feedback was always, your pitch intrigued me because of what was in the parentheses. And it was simply this: Elizabeth Pamplone, parentheses, your best guest ever, parentheses, marketing minimalist, et cetera, et cetera. And it had my pitch.
So I'm hearing a couple of things that skilled networks do well. Skilled networkers do well, right? Making it easy, right? Like you are reducing friction from the podcaster's mind by, number one, presenting yourself in line with the topic du jour, right? Obviously, like the integration with the topic, then knowing that they need to come up with some kind of intro and they need to know some kind of interesting way to present you. You're doing that work for them. And then also kind of doing the thing that makes you also stand out, which is parentheses, your best guest ever. They probably don't get that very often. It makes them go, okay, that's a little something here.
A lot of the times I didn't email. I would go to, so my strategy was a little different. I would go to these online lists and they would say, here's the 20 people looking for guests. And then I would look at their requirements. And if I met their requirements, I would apply. And usually you would apply through the system. So there wasn't like a subject line you were pushing through. Another thing I would do is I would join Facebook groups that had to do with guesting on podcasts. Someone would post something. I would say, hey, I'd love to be on your show in the comment. Then I'd post a link to my press kit and they could check me out for themselves. But the press kit had everything they would need if I was to be on the show: the headshots, the logo link, the website link, the freebie link, my bio, how to say my name phonetically, like everything was there for them. A list of topics I would cover, questions they could ask me that they could download and print. Like it was all on the press kit. So I wasn't ever really emailing directly. The only time I emailed directly was when I found this guy. He was a marketer. He had been on probably like 80 podcasts. And he was really good. And he was on really good podcasts. Like the host that he was on as a guest, they just were so good. They were so polished. And I was like, these are the kinds of shows I want to get on. And so I literally went on his website. I wrote down every single podcast he was on. I went to those individual websites for those individual podcasts. I either went to their apply link and applied through there, or I went to their contact form, which usually doesn't have a subject, and I would put my pitch in there and say, I'd love to be on your show. Here's a little about me. Here's a link to my press kit. Let me know. So I used a couple different strategies to actually find the shows and then apply.
Okay. So list of strategies. First, you were using the podcast broker kind of services, right? Like
the list, yeah.
A bunch of those popped up during the pandemic. So that was definitely an opportunity, a time and place, right? You used Facebook groups. And then you also said you found some dude that made awesome podcasts and you followed kind of like his wake. Was that somebody that you followed already? Or how did you figure out that this person was really great on podcasts and that you would be great on the podcast that he was on?
So I was on a show that I really, really liked and that the host was amazing and his production was amazing. So I started listening to other shows that he had done. And I found someone who was on the show way prior to me, maybe a year ahead of me. And I really liked his presentation method and how he spoke and his stories. And so then I started following his like press side of his website. And when I saw all the other shows he had been on, knowing that we had been on the same, series, we'd been in the same show before, knowing that I could reach that caliber because we were kind of peers at that point, I could say to the people when I was pitching, I would sometimes add something like, I saw that you had so-and-so on your show. We were both on such and such show. Here's a link. to kind of give that credibility that, hey, you already know this guy, even though he doesn't know me, but I can relate to him and I can kind of connect up with him and use his coattails a little bit to say, oh, we were on the same show over here. That's really high quality. You should totally check this out.
That is a brilliant strategy. We're going to call this the podcast tour wake strategy, right? Like, this is so freaking smart. You mentioned a couple of things, right? A, if you find somebody that has been on the shows that you want to be on, how can you level up till you get to maybe the lowest rung on the ladder of shows that that person has been on, and then parlay that up the chain? That's very similar to what people do in the blogosphere of like, if I can get published on some stupid blog and then I can send it to some stupid business journal, that I can then send it to some stupid magazine that I can then send to the Wall Street Journal, right? Like there is precedence for this in the marketing world. I've never heard anybody utilize that in this strategy. And I think that's absolutely freaking brilliant. Speaking of nailing your messaging, how did you prepare to really nail your messaging?
So I was not prepared for that. When I first started, if you go back and you listen to, like the first few episodes that I ever did, oh, don't do that. Don't. They were too much, right? I wanted to give all the things for all the reasons and have all the info out there. And then there were some where I pulled way back because I was like, oh, I gave too much info last time. And my message was almost nothing because I pulled too far back. So going through all that, I would say probably about 30, 40, around between 30 to 50 in, somewhere in there, I started to hit a stride where I knew what questions were going to be asked. I knew what people were thinking. I knew what the pulse was. But it did take me that many to go through to realize, what are the questions people are asking? Because I could talk about social media all day. I could talk about websites all day, but it doesn't matter if it's not the questions that people actually have and it's not answering those questions. So once I got a few in and, then people started asking me for like the questions to ask me. They wanted me to give them questions to ask me. And I was like, no, I need you to ask me the questions. But yeah, I just think that the messaging part took me some time to find my way. But once I did, the rest of the 150 were just like sleepwalking for me. I mean, it was literally just, I could do it in my sleep. One time one of the people didn't do a video. And so it was just audio. So I literally sat in my office. I had a migraine and I just talked and it was just like, I'm just going to do it because I have to. And I already signed up for this. But so it was just one of those things. It was such an autopilot thing and those episodes were some of my best ones. And even the episodes that I thought were horrible, like this one guy, I don't know what was happening that day, but it was off. We were both off. And I thought he was mad at me the whole time. It's just the way he was asking the questions. He just seemed really like put off by everything I said. And I was getting a little defensive because I was like, well, this is the way it is, And so then I listened back to that episode and we sounded amazing. I don't know. I guess just in my head, that's the way it sounded. So my other lesson was, from that was that I needed to listen back to my episodes, because even if I thought it went poorly or I thought I didn't get the message across that I wanted to, especially in the beginning, I would listen to the episodes as they aired, because I would hear not only the things that went wrong where I could fix, right? I could say, oh yeah, don't say that again, or don't use that example again. But then I could also hear the brilliant pieces that came out of it and go, that girl, you find it, girl, that's great. Like that's awesome. So, and kind of give myself a little pat on the back, because when you're doing that many and you're kind of putting that out as a labor of love, you don't get paid for this part of it. It was very discouraging sometimes when I wouldn't hear anything or there wouldn't be any traction from it. But that really wasn't why I was doing it in the end. But at the same time, it can be, 30, 40, 50, 60 in, you're like, all right, is this going to work? Is this going to be a thing?
Yeah. Reps, man, right? Like the value of getting reps in and being able to like iterate and get better and then put it on autopilot. And another thing that you are referencing is this idea of there's so much value in going back and re-listening. Like I used to never do it, right? Like I used to be like, nah, I'm not, it's kind of douchey. And then I started thinking about it differently. I started thinking about it like great athletes watch game tape, right? Mm-hmm. They go back and they look at their mistakes and they look at what they did well. And I have found so much value. And I heard Christopher Lockett talking about how he re-listens to all of his podcasts. And if you don't like your own podcast, then go punch yourself in the face and stop making a podcast. What in your head and all this repetition makes a good speaking point or makes a good preparation for a podcast?
Definitely the tease. The tease is the best.
Give us an example. What's the tease?
So in the beginning, I would talk about websites, or social media, for example. I'll use social media. It's a better example. So I talk about social media and I would say we create 1 year in a day. We create 365 posts in a day. Like I'd be explaining this whole process. And then I would say, it's really easy. You can do it too. And people would say, oh my gosh, I couldn't even think of that. The host would just be incredibly like, oh my gosh. And they would say, well, how do you do that? Right? How's that even possible? So I would lay out literally the whole day in like 10 minutes. And I would just give like a rundown of everything we would do. And the host was just like, okay, that's okay. That sounds great. Like, first of all, they were thinking it's impossible. I could never do that. I don't know what you're talking about. And then they would say, okay, well, what system do you use to schedule all these posts? And I would tell them exactly where. I would just like, transparency, here's the system I use, blah, blah, blah. And I cut myself out of the process. I totally cut myself out. And I would literally give them every little thing. So then when I was tweaking that process and saying, okay, what can I take out without taking out the message? And what can I give without giving it all away? And so now it goes a little something like, if someone says, oh my gosh, well, how do you do that? 365 posts in a day, how would you even create that? I say, well, one of the best types of posts you can create, which is going to give you a lot of content really fast, so I'm giving you an instant win, right, is to go to your FAQ page. Go to your FAQ page, take all your FAQs and make them posts. How many posts have you created? 10, 20? How many all at once? Like, it's just done. But it's not my whole process, right? I'm not giving you the whole process. I'm giving you a very, really, really good, really good thing that you can do right now. But then, and they say, well, what program do you use? Like, how do you get all these posts all done in one day and scheduled? Well, I actually have a pro toolkit. You can go to getabsolutemarketing.com/free. You could download the pro toolkit. And it has everything that I use in my business, no holds barred, super transparent, and tons of discounts. So I'm not giving you the name of it so that you can go look it up and cut me out of the process, but then I could get affiliate marketing through it, or I can get the company to notice how many people I'm sending through to them so that we can do projects later. So I'm utilizing my same exact tools, but in a different way.
Are you giving tips on like how to monetize a podcast right now, or how to create good podcast speaking points? Is kind of where I'm like, where my head goes. It's both, right?
You have to have both. You have to do both at the same time. It's kind of like, I used to follow this guy named Mark Vickers, and he did this thing called Speaking is Selling. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is totally me. I could talk all day long and I could sell all day long. So I went to some of his seminars, and this was his point. He's like, if you're speaking, you're selling, right? And it's about giving value, but then taking something and receiving it as well. So not only am I saying, hey, go get your FAQs, make them all posts. Now you've just done 20 posts or 10 posts really, really fast. That's how the day will go, or that's how our process works. And then saying, hey, this is a system that I use. I really like all these programs, but I'm not just going to give them all to you one by one. You'd be writing down them forever. I just compiled them in a list. And if I change one, you get notified. It's changes in the list. So it's constantly up to date. So I'm giving you something else as well, but I'm also receiving your email address and kind of your trust that I'm going to not spam you, but at the same time, I'm giving you something, but I'm also receiving too.
I feel like I have Russell Brunson on my podcast right now. Right. Like when I'm listening to Russell Brunson speak, like I'm like, this dude is selling me right now. I know because I've studied everything he's doing, and I know everything he's doing, and he's always selling me, but I'm learning so much. I can't stop listening to this freaking guy.
Right.
Man, that's really smart. Right. So speaking of Russell Brunson, one of the things that you've been saying this whole time, apart, like the tease and how to lay out that kind of like the yellow brick road, right? Like you're like laying out a yellow brick road for people to come to your Oz, or whatever you want to call it. But within it all is that you have a mastery of hook points, right? Like I can tell that you were like a hook point factory. You're like, 365 posts in one day, 200 podcasts in a year. Like you have this, right? When did you learn the value? Explain to me what I'm saying right now, because I'm just saying hook points because I get it. Yeah. But like, somebody that our friend that's listening
It
right now, you know, like
goes
what
back
is
to
that
marketing minimalism. It goes back to minimalism. It goes back, actually, to be honest, and this is something I've never shared on a podcast before, so Pablo exclusive.
about? Teaser.
All right.
Prepare to be sold.
Nancy Drew Reporter. Nancy Drew Reporter is a 1942 film, and it's a Nancy Drew film is a kind of based on the books, a teen bop movie of the day. And she was writing an article. She was this reporter. She had to like go and find the story. She had to get the scoop, right? She had to write the headline. And the whole thing was writing the headline, telling the story, and getting them to come back for more. And so that's kind of what I've always done with marketing is tell me something amazing, but in a very short way, then explain it to me, and then get me to come back for more. And so, you know, that's kind of the process I use for everything. And if I'm going to create something for a client, for myself, a product, a blog post, a social post, a podcast setup, even a PowerPoint for a webinar or a live class, I'm going to tell you something amazing. I'm going to explain it to you, and then I'm going to get you to come back for more.
All right. Wow. I did not know that Russell Brunson's hook story offer was something he stole from Nancy Drew. That's pretty
Pretty much, yeah.
That's fascinating.